I still can't remember what I was running away from that put me there, the place where this all started. I'll leave it to you to judge the right or the wrong of the thing, the friends from the enemies. Though it's never that simple. The truth just doesn't come that easy. To begin with, it's not in my nature to run toward trouble. The life of the timid can be lethal enough. This kind of work is definitely my drug of choice. I got hooked right away, and even though I'd been using for quite some time by then, I still tried to go in positive, with an open mind. Like a beginner, like the first time. There's no need to be stupid about it. Of course you take the experience you've gained over time, but that, and a talent for being able to go from one disaster to the next catastrophe with unaltered enthusiasm, is a trait that's always served me well. Some call that faith, and maybe that's all faith really is. I'm not going to tell you my name. By the time this is over, you'll realize that who I am means nothing, and I value my anonymity. 48 yards to the right of me sat the two Russians. They sipped at their coffee and tried to look as though they were not waiting for something. I knew them both. Boris, the larger one, tipped the scales at 138 kilos, and even at that weight, he could run a mile flat out and barely break a sweat. Like a lot of big guys, he was a man of gentle disposition. Victor, his boss, was half the man Boris was. In fact, I had never once seen Victor show any kind of emotion at all. If Victor had the strength of Boris, he could make real trouble in this world. I guess God does protect the dumb animals. I took another sip of my now cold coffee. They made some damn good coffee here, even cold. Victor drained his cup and then laid the cup upside down on its saucer, and that was the signal. The last time, I made a promise to myself, as I do each time, that this would be the last time. That once I had the money, I would never do something like this ever again. I knew that was a lie when I said it, and it's a bad idea to lie to yourself. Boris stood up and straightened his jacket, a totally pointless effort. After fiddling and tugging, he still looked like Russian sausage in a sports coat. I sat up a little in my chair and watched Boris walk away about 15 yards before disappearing between two buildings. So far, so good, I thought. But I was sweating pretty soon. I like to control these kinds of situations by not controlling them, and that way I'm ready for whatever might happen. There are times when letting go opens the door. Still, this just felt like it was taking too long. Victor waited as well, looking in my general direction, but not at me. He looked his part. Evil. But we're not evil guys. Sometimes we get good people out of a tight spot, if the money is right. But most times we get good money out of a tight spot, if the people are right. And on the menu this evening, diamonds. To my mind, the most universally liquid form of currency on this or any nearby planet. Finally, after more than 10 minutes, Boris reappeared around the corner. His gun hand was in his jacket while his other hand hung free. No bag, no merchandise. I know Boris. He's a right-hand gun, left-hand items kind of guy. People like Boris are mechanical. They wake up at the same hour every day. They chew their food 34 times each bite. 1 second passed, and then 2, and then a girl, maybe 14 years old, walked into view after Boris. She looked very small next to him. She had dark hair and darker eyes. She walked beside Boris, not behind him. She wasn't tall, but still kind of lanky. I was not expecting another person on this job, lanky or otherwise. I must have missed the memo. In my business, you stay calm. Still in my head, the alarm bells were ringing out the holy what the fuck chorus in 3-part harmony. But I did stay calm. I was watching Boris. I saw his dropped hand fly apart. I saw his pinky and thumb come loose and turn to mist as sound bounced around the square. The shot spun him to his left. He drew his gun and staggered sideways in front of the girl. A second shot struck Boris in the back of the neck, and he fell forward, no doubt saving the kid's life. I was on my feet before thinking. I didn't hear a direction of the shot. There were too many echoes. A quick scan showed no open windows, but my ass was out in the open where it ought not be. Behind me was the shortest route to cover, but I was not under fire. In front of me at twice the distance was the reason I was there, lying under 300 pounds of dead Russian. So God bless rock and roll, I started to run. Victor rose, turned, and drew down. I pulled out my weapon. Victor was aiming his clunky Russian pistol at me. His gun was the same caliber as mine, but held 2 more rounds in the clip, and that just didn't seem fair to me somehow. In that moment, another shot cracked into the air, and Victor fell right into my path. Something wet sprayed my cheek. I knew, but didn't want to think about what it was. Almost by instinct, I grabbed at him as he fell. I don't know, hoping to use him as a shield or drag him. But I was going too fast, and Victor fell dead on the stones 10 feet from where Boris had. Whatever had sprayed my cheek was starting to burn my eye now. I tried harder not to think about what it was. I just dove into the alcove where Boris lay. I wiped my cheek without looking at my hand. I really didn't want to think about it. The girl looked fine, considering her feet were pinned under a very dead Boris. I rolled my friend off of her, and she moved away. Then she picked up Boris's gun and stood up in one smooth motion. And she handed his weapon to me without a word. Her hands weren't even shaking. I thought that was a little odd, considering. I remember I felt plenty back-footed at that moment. "Are you okay, kid?" I asked. She didn't answer me. She just looked up at me with those dark eyes, strangely calm. I pulled us a few feet further into the cover of the buildings, and then she looked up at me and spoke. "Andrew, I have the items you seek," snapping off well-rehearsed words through a thick Russian accent, with no smile and no emotion. Boris must have told her who I was. So much for my anonymity. What I remember about it now was how hard it was not to laugh. I'm a big cartoons fan, and Rocky and Bullwinkle is about my favorite, and she just sounded like a miniature Natasha to me. It struck me funny at the moment. Still, out of there was the order of the right damn now. 20 yards away was the end of the little row of buildings sheltering us. After that was the street, an open, crowded street. I figured these people, whoever they were, couldn't be crazy enough to drop a little kid or me on a busy street. I couldn't quite figure out what had these guys pissed off, but they were annoyed. I was pretty sure that I wasn't the one that made them like that. After all, I was still alive. The place where we were was no longer safe, and I got up and started moving for cover, and then it struck me. She's a kid, asshole. She doesn't know how to play this. So I stopped and looked back, and there she was right behind me, her back to the wall, her eyes alert, looking up to me as if to ask what the holdup was. "I have the items you seek," she started to say again, before I cut her off. Looking back on it now, I should have known what she was saying, but at that moment, I just wanted some shade. "17 minutes later, we were in the warm lobby of a small hotel that took walk-ins and never asked many questions. I got us a pair of rooms on the top floor across from each other. I wanted her safe, but away from me. If someone came blasting through the door after her, I wanted to be behind them and not up front. I wasn't afraid of her running. more of drawing unwanted attention from overeager competitors. When I put the key in her hand, she looked up at me and grinned, smiling in a child's version of being alluring. "We don't need separate rooms?" she asked, as she moved a fraction of an inch closer to me. "Aw, sweetheart," I smiled. "You don't have to try that shit on me." And I put my shoulders squarely between us. She looked a little put out, and then she smiled, even relaxed, a little. Then it was my turn to smile. "Let's go upstairs, regroup, wash up a little," I said, pointing to my face. "And I'll knock on your door in 10 minutes, and I'll need some answers." I felt like I was way behind in this, and I needed some time to catch up, though frankly, this whole thing was beginning to spell out "bad plan" in letters about 100 feet tall. We walked to our rooms. I watched her close and listened to her lock her door, while I backed to mine. In the bathroom, I found a face towel, put it in the sink. I turned on both taps to let the water run. I looked at my face in the mirror. On my right side, I now had a very light mist of dark red-colored freckles. Victor's last laugh. Over the next few minutes, I worked at turning that scratchy white towel a rusty red, and when finished, I looked out the window of my room onto the street. I saw nothing. No one leaning against a wall or slowly walking past. No one that appeared to be waiting for us. Though if they're any good at it, you tend to not see them. I then spent the next 4 minutes with my eye to the peephole. I couldn't figure out how the kid fit into this situation. Someone had trusted her with a good deal of money, and that meant one of two things. They either had something big on her, or had promised something big to her. And that's the way the world was. Still is. Everyone is in business. And despite her small size and tender years, she seemed more than equal to the task. Whatever had passed for childhood was long the stuff of memory for this one. As I watched her door, I began to review my options. I had been ready to transport a case, a small overnight bag at most. Not a person. What kind of a fucked up God puts me in charge of a person? A kid, no less. Though I was starting to take that term more and more lightly. Thinking back, she had picked up Boris's gun as her first thought, and come to think of it, she picked it up correctly. Odder still, she then turned the gun around and handed it to me correctly. Not her first gun? Maybe. The letters in "bad plan" began to grow larger. 9.5 minutes gone, and I couldn't take one more second of the squeal the broken fan in my room made. I opened the door and stepped into the sweltering hallway. I would have to speak to someone in management about my fan. I knocked on her door 5 times like I told her, and she opened it. We traded the heat of the hotel for the heat of a small cafe downstairs. I had been drinking coffee all day and I was hungry. We ordered. I anticipated roast lamb, though truthfully, I hated the food here and couldn't wait to be back home.